Doctors of Reddit, what patient made you go how the frick are you even alive? Lady in her mid-30s was in the clinic for a 1-week follow-up post-foot amputation diabetes. She was admitted straight from the clinic because her blood glucose was 600 mg/dl, normal is 80 to 120, and the wound was severely infected. We used super concentrated doses of insulin to bring it back to the 200s. She was on strict diet restrictions and we couldn't figure out how it wouldn't drop any lower than 250. Turns out her kids' teens had been sneaking giant 64-ounce sodas and candy bars into the hospital, literally 1 week after we chopped her foot off because of uncontrolled diabetes. Not exactly a case of how the frick did you survive that trauma/disease, but how the frick do you even function on your own?
This video is brought to you by Fiverr, the biggest, most affordable, and overall the best freelance website there is. It's a place where you can hire anyone from writers to designers and everyone in between for as little as $5. It's absolutely the best place to save time and money for your projects. But if you want to take your business a step further, we would highly recommend Fiverr Pro, a place where you can work with verified, hand-vetted, exceptionally talented professionals that have, with their work for companies like Google or Apple, proven to be the best in their category. Link in the description below.
My father's doctor couldn't believe he didn't need to amputate his feet and he was still alive. Dad had brittle diabetes. His pancreas would kick in and out due to a congenital deformity. At 82, he had significant heart issues, including angina, enlarged heart, and clogged arteries. One day, his feet went black. Not just bluish or gray, black as charcoal. Rushed to emergency. We were told they would amputate, but to say our goodbyes. Dad refused surgery, said he'd rather be dead at his age. Hours later, his feet were pink. We took him home that morning. Doctor actually apologized for upsetting us, but said he'd never seen anything like it. During residency, my IQ patient had to have his chest reopened less than an hour after 6-hour open heart CABG surgery. He needed 12 units of blood, his heart massage then shocked 4 times. Cardiothoracic surgeon and the IQ operating, because no time to go back down to or, was an illicit drug abuser and alcoholic. Nurses called him the sea coach. I checked in on him for 4 weeks. He was unresponsive every day. On week 20 we had to consult and to take maggots out of his nose. I was sure he was a goner after that. Week 3 passed, no change. Week 4, day 24 I believe, at 6 AM. He opens his eyes. I was shocked. He has a permanent tracheostomy now, but somehow is alive. EMT here. Brought in a PT hos. Now former girlfriend stabbed him in the face with a chef's knife. The knife went through his right eye, missed his cranial cavity, and stopped about a millimeters from his brainstem. The X-ray was nuts. We showed everyone. Currently a med student, but was formerly a nurse. While working as a nurse I had this one patient who was originally from the Congo complaining of right lower abdominal pain, with a subsequent diagnosis of appendicitis. Nothing crazy about that. See it every day. The crazy part was the story he told me next. He said that he didn't think it could be appendicitis, and when I asked him why he told me this, when he was in the Congo, he was out in the bush treeing to poach gorillas. Awful. I know when he developed right lower abdominal pain, nausea, fever, etc. Being out in the bush, far from medical attention, he and his buddy decided the best course of action was to cut open his abdomen with a machete and remove his own fucking appendix. After nearly dying from the surgery, he then went on to nearly die from sepsis over the next several weeks. I assume he was under medical care by this point. Somehow, he manages to overcome nearly impossible odds and survives, and years later immigrated to Canada, where he develops appendicitis again. So after hearing this I was equally amazed as well as skeptical, but he showed me his scar, which I thought was fairly validating. I told his surgeon the story and asked why would he still get appendicitis, and they said he most likely just didn't remove the whole thing. I know this is all hearsay, and it is definitely possible it was exaggerated or even entirely fabricated by the patient, but if it's true, it's one of the most badass things I've ever heard, and definitely belongs here. Veterinarian. Dog hit by a train. It severed the dog's leg and the dog carried its own leg home. Owner brought dog and leg to the ER. Edit. Leg could not be reattached due to significant damage to limb. Dogs do great as tripods though. That dog must have been crazy from pain. That's amazing. Did it survive? I'm assuming that the leg wasn't reattached and now there's a 3-legged dog being absolutely doted on somewhere in the world. As a med student on my emergency rotation, I had a guy brought in who had fallen off a 7th or 8th floor balcony and landed on his head. Essentially door, and we couldn't get a blood pressure when he got to the hospital. As a student, my job was to basically stand to the side and squeeze the bajillion bags of blood that went into this dude. His cervical spine was essentially dust on the initial CT scan we got. I figured he probably wouldn't have made it, but about a month later I'm now on my IQ rotation and I see this guy awake and conscious. Pretty crazy. Obligatory, not a doctor, but my daddy's, and he liked to tell us about the crazy shoot he saw. This post made me think of one of those in particular. Huge guy, Linebacker build, came into the trauma ward with a gunshot, wound dead center of the chest. He could breathe fine, and he had a pulse. So they did a chest X-ray, and found that the bullet had spent all its energy getting through this guy's sternum, and was just resting on his pericardium. We had a guy with a major aortic dissection one night. From the bedside ultrasound, he looked like he had already bled out. He had some chest pain, but he was alert and oriented, and we were shocked he was even still alive. He absolutely shouldn't have been with how much blood we saw, and the size of the dissection. We called the surgeon in, who was really blunt, and explained to the guy he was probably going to die in surgery. He was a young guy, like late 40s. He was on a business trip, and it was completely unexpected. He kept trying to call his wife, but it was like 2 AM and she wasn't answering. He just wanted to talk and tell her goodbye. It was actually pretty devastating to watch. Meanwhile he's so coherent and alert, as if he isn't actively bleeding out and dying. Most patients we would get in the same situation wouldn't be conscious, or would already be dead. They swooped him off to surgery before he could contact his wife, and the dude lived. Remembering that story got me through a lot of tough years in the ER, because I think it just reminded me that hope and good outcomes are still out there. Edit. Geez, this blew up. I picked up my phone this morning and had no idea what happened. Thanks all for the awards and the interesting discussion. To those of you with similar stories, know that you are the reason a lot of providers keep doing what they do. Some of your experiences are unbelievable. I'm still trying to read through all the comments. To clarify some things, late 40s is young for this kind of case to happen. We usually see people dissect in their 70s to 90s. Also, late 40s is a pretty young age to die, especially if you don't have any chronic illnesses. A couple of weeks ago, my ed lost a 30-year-old to COVID-19. A couple of nurses cried because we consider people twice his age still pretty young. This happened when I was still a tech and had only been in the ER for about a year. He was brought in by EMS uncomfortable, but definitely awake and alert. His ECG was normal and he didn't have any pertinent history, just chronic HTN and a few minor surgeries. But he was hypertensive and really pale, and when we performed an US, we found what looked like a huge volume of blood in the abdomen and a visible intimal tear. We pretty much immediately diagnosed him with AD and had vascular surgery in the room within a few minutes. I followed up on his chart a few days later and found out not only that he was alive, but he was already extubated and able to walk. I'll try to keep sorting through comments. I'm surprised that this isn't as uncommon as I thought. I have a hospice patient that has been on our service for 4 years. I'm either really great at hospice or really bad at it. My great-grandma went to hospice because she was no longer ambulatory, needed help using the restroom, losing weight, etc. A month in, her nurse comes in to find her in the restroom on her own steam. This was paired with a marked weight gain. Turns out the nursing home food was shoot, so she just wasn't eating enough, but the hospice facility let her have salty, buttery pierogi and kielbasa again, so she started eating. I had a patient who was literally cut in half at the pelvis after a car hit him and pinned him to a telephone pole. Paramedics carried his legs in separately. He was wide awake and talking to me as we quickly put in a central line, and he got all the bleeders ligated by like 5 different surgeons. He declined pain meds repeatedly. What a legend. He was in the OR 5 minutes later. Luckily this was at a major academic center with an exceptional trauma surgery team. Apparently the guy lived, not sure what his quality of life was after, but pretty crazy. I work in trauma and once had a guy fall off a roof. He said he remembered hitting the bars on the scaffolding on the way down. We originally thought head fractured his femur, but nope, just a small hematoma. He was in bed next to a man who had broken his ribs and had a small C-spine fracture when he fell forward picking up his keys. Patient here. When I was 2 I was being treated for asthma due to wheezing, labored breathing, etc. One night it got exceptionally bad, so my mom took me to the ER. They put me face down to do a cord scan. This was 1990, and when they were done, they turned me back over, and I was blue, had stopped breathing. Court revealed a volleyball-size mass in my chest. Emergency surgery revealed what was supposed to be my twin. It kept growing inside my rib cage and finally had nowhere to go in my toddler body, so it cut off my airway. It had fingernails, hair, appendages. Everything but major organs. I made a full recovery. I'm a healthy 31-year-old now. Zero asthma. Only remnant of that night is a scar that goes from the center of my chest to the center of my back. Update. Definitely didn't expect this to blow up. Damn. Thanks for my first gold. This was a teratoma, so it was never a viable human. Edited the post to show that I'm the healthy 31-year-old. Lol, anybody that quoted White Scroot is my hero. A couple pictures of me before and after brain surgeries were on the front page around this time last year. The mortality rate for acute sideral hematomas is 50-90%. Of those who live, approximately 20-30% regain any brain functioning. Due to the sideral hematoma, the bleeding in my skull was so severe that I also had cranial herniation. My brain tilted 5 mm, causing my brainstem to compress into my spinal cord. That I not only lived, but woke up and recovered well enough to go back to work / get married / travel the world / return to baseline physically is a straight up medical miracle. I'm still in touch with the neurosurgeon who was on call at the hospital that day, and he says the same thing. I was on home call for her in a small town. Got a call from the ER nurse one night, and she was like, "Em's brought someone in here, and they think she might be dead." I was like, "Well, is she?" She was like, "I don't know." This was a seasoned RN, by the way, so I was like, well, guess we're treating this as a code blue kind of situation. So without any further information, I jump into my car and rush over to the hospital. Once I got there, I realized why the triage nurse was so confused. In the trauma bay lay what appeared to be skeletonized remains under a blanket. The person felt warm to touch, so I opened their eye, and a yellow, wrinkled, shrunken eyeball stared at me and then suddenly moved. Potassium of 1, for those familiar with lab values. The backstory was extreme self-neglect / depression combined with carriage neglect. Weighed in at 67 pounds at a height of about 55. We actually resuscitated her, very aggressively and unbelievably. After about 8 liters of fluid, she started speaking a word or two at a time, and recognized her daughter. Currently in residency, but this was a patient I saw in medical school. This one has more to do with a patient's past medical history instead of anything acute. Had one patient in one of my internal medicine rotations who was admitted for hip surgery who was one of the nicest, sweetest people I've ever met. Her surgery was pretty routine and there were no complications. In her past medical history, she was diagnosed with stage 4 endometrial cancer that had spread to her brain. Apparently she had undergone chemo, radiation, primary tumor resection, and surgery to remove the brain met. She remained cancer-free since that period. The fact that she had undergone that whole ordeal and appeared to be mostly healthy and was in remission from her cancer really blew my mind. Not a doctor, but I had a few doctors ask me that. Typically, if you get appendicitis it'll rupture and sepsis will set in within a day or so. And when that happens, it gets real bad real fast. So I got appendicitis. It freaking hurt so bad, but I didn't know I had appendicitis. I went to the doctor, he couldn't tell what was going on. Though I had compacted stool and wanted me to take stool softeners. So I did. It didn't help. Cause spoiler, it was appendicitis, right? And then a roommate who thinks he knows what he's talking about tells me that it's all in my head and I just need to physically get off the couch and exercise because he feels much better after he exercises. Okay dude. I can't even get off the couch to use the restroom without almost passing out in pain. He tells me to just play a video game to get my mind off of it. I go to class, grad student at the time. I call the doctor and make another appointment. He doesn't know what's going on. I talk with another doctor, no clue, he thought maybe it's appendicitis, but I didn't have a fever and didn't have a recoil pain. So maybe it was gastrointestinal stuff. So I schedule an appointment, meet with them. All the while I'm going to class and taking the maximum dosage of all pain relievers I can get my hands on. And finally the GI doctor scans showed that I had appendicitis. Hooray. I go to the nearest ER and I say, in a totally calm tone, "Hi, my name is insert name here." So, my doctor said I should probably go to the ER because my appendix burst a while ago and it should probably be taken out or something. Turns out, my appendix burst, and I held onto it for 3.5 weeks. I had a dozen doctors come in, and some of them even started by saying, "Hello, my name is Dr. Such and Such, and I heard that you're the guy who has had a burst appendix for nearly a month, and you're still alive. I'm not on your case, but I just wanted to meet you. How the hell are you still alive? How the hell did you drive yourself here and just waltz into our I got that alien biangani ring upgrade where the abdomen moves around and wall seals off the burst appendix so it doesn't leak everywhere. Edit. After my primary care physician learned I had appendicitis and he didn't diagnose it, he retired within a month. It was probably coincidental." Best comment of the day. There's a famous story where the EMTs called the hospital that a car crash victim has something in his mouth. It was a section of the 2D top pipe of a chain link fence that was lodged through his head and neck, millimeters from being fatal. They had sawn the pipe off to transport him. He lived.